again, it's a great opportunity. We're talking about leading with conviction-driven marketing, living out your values, and that includes how you even choose to respond to things like this.
They have flexible definitions for their words, and what their words are designed to do is to bludgeon you into compliance.
Because sometimes you're deliberately engaging in politics, and sometimes politics engages with you. Right?
Yes. Hello, and welcome to the Liberty Spenders Podcast. We are your hosts, Kurt and Kristen Luidhardt, co-founders of the Prosper Group, an agency that's helped raise over $500 million and help elect over 100 members of Congress, 15 governors, 15 U.S. senators, and 1 president. And now, in addition to helping political candidates get elected, we're helping your business get elected by answering this question. What if you could tap into a lucrative and engaged audience that we call Liberty Spenders? Liberty Spenders are just politically conservative or faith-based consumers. They make up 76.5 million people, and they're looking to buy from businesses and brands that align with their values. If you want to learn more about this, you can get access to our new book at libertyspenders.com/free.
Our guest today is Paul Valone. He's president of Grassroots North Carolina, and he's author of Rules for Anti-Radicals, a Practical Handbook for Defeating Leftism, which I'm really excited to talk about today. But before we get into that, Paul is the president of Grassroots North Carolina. He's the author of the book previously mentioned. For nearly 3 decades, he's been a leading voice in the fight for gun rights and conservative advocacy. His activism began in response to the 1994 assault weapons ban when, finding no suitable organization to take action, he spearheaded a rally that led to the creation of Grassroots North Carolina. And under his leadership, GRNC has become the state's most influential gun rights organization. Paul's a retired Boeing 777 captain for American Airlines. He's also the host of Guns, Politics, and Freedom radio show, where he continues to advocate for Second Amendment rights and conservative principles. But I'm just really excited to talk about his book because on our show, we talk a lot about how businesses can market to Liberty Spenders. Mm-hmm. And what Paul's a real expert at is how does a business that might be branded as conservative or Christian and somebody who's living their values deal with it when a company or when a cause-oriented leftist cause comes after them, which we've had happen before. And how do you deal with that? How do you respond to it? So I'm real excited to get into it. Paul, so excited to have you today.
Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me, guys.
Yeah. Well, I want to hear the story. I mean, we covered it a little bit in our introduction about how you got started with Grassroots North Carolina back in 1994, because it sounds like there's some real juicy details there ready to be shared.
I was, aside from being vaguely conservative, a member of the NRA and whatnot, as you mentioned, I watched the 1994 assault weapon ban. And suitably outraged, I started looking for a group that would organize a rally for the Second Amendment in my state. And because at that point, I still considered rallies to be an effective political instrument. I now know they're somewhat limited. But I found a group in Ohio calling themselves the Committee of 1776. And they were organizing coordinated state rallies around the United States on the 4th of July weekend in 1994, leading up to a national rally in Washington. And this was only 30 days away. So I said, that's great. Who's organizing the rally in North Carolina? And they said, you are. And so
yeah.
2 guys and I, without use of the internet, put about 1,000 people on the Capitol steps in 30 days. We had the wherewithal to take names. And we then began use that list to create a not-for-profit organization, Grassroots North Carolina, which has been doing legislative advocacy ever since. And as you do, we have a very, very active election effort, doing independent expenditures for and against candidates, depending on their stance on the gun issue. So this stuff is very effective. We've passed, the concealed handgun law in 1994, concealed handgun reciprocity, the purchase permit bypass. We eventually repealed our Jim Crow era purchase permit law, Castle Doctrine, stand your ground, and the expansion of concealed carry into a bunch of places like restaurants, assemblies of people, and whatnot. So our techniques are very effective. And quite frankly, as I may have mentioned, sometimes I've been on the opposite side of the businesses in producing boycotts in order to affect change. And so I know how the leftists do this stuff, and I also know how to counter it. And that's what I'm hoping I can relay today.
That will be incredibly valuable. But I always love how people start in politics. I also really got my start in 1994. Now, I think I might be a couple years younger than you because I was still in high school in 1994.
Yeah, a little. Yes.
But that's what got me hooked on politics. I was really inspired by what was happening when the Republicans took over the House and the Senate for the very first time. And
the Republican Revolution.
Yeah. And that Newt Gingrich had me inspired, and I was hooked as I was the one dude, right, as a sophomore in high school who was watching what was happening in politics and listening to Rush Limbaugh, who had a TV show, if you remember, about that time. And that's so about the same time you and I were both saying, hey, we want to get involved in this, and sometimes people ask me, well, how'd you get into politics? And I find that most people's stories are the same. You find something like you with this assault weapons ban that you knew was so wrong. And you realize, well, somebody's got to do it, right? And you made the mistake of asking who would, right?
Exactly right. Yes.
Today's your lucky day.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, you don't ever say what should be done because you're volunteering yourself, right?
Well, I tell my volunteers that too. Grassroots North Carolina is all volunteer, and anybody who comes up with an idea for something to be done, guess what? Okay, it's their project.
Yeah. And so you started, you said you started probably with just, people who showed up to the event. You got their names and addresses and started with a mailing list. And now, how many years later is that now? 30 years later, you're emailing them, right? So
absolutely. List building is essential, not only for political organizations, but for corporations. Absolutely.
Yeah. And over the years, how have you sort of changed that up? So first it was a paper sign up. Now, do you still do events and collect names there?
We have. We do events. We obviously have a website that attracts people. We have a very active Facebook page. We actually hired some professional media consultants for our Facebook page. Right now, we've got about 75,000 people on our email list. And what we do as a grassroots mobilization organization, we direct intense input to particular legislators or particular corporations or committees or county commissions, whatever it happens to be. The late Senator Everett Dirksen once said, "When I feel the heat, I see the light." That's how it works.
I love that. What'd you call it? Intense interest?
Intense grassroots pressure. Yep.
Yeah. Yes.
Basically, what we do for passing right now, we're working on a permitless concealed carry bill in North Carolina. In the last session, we repealed the Jim Crow era pistol purchase permit law. What we do is we have a few thousand of our best friends contact a legislator, and then we send in our legislative action team saying, "Hi, we're from Grassroots North Carolina. I think you know what we want."
I think you've heard from a few of our members. Yeah.
I have learned through the years too. It can be shocking how few calls or few emails are required to get a legislator's attention.
Absolutely.
I think sometimes we assume, it's got to be thousands and thousands, but you have 25 or 30 people call a state legislative office. They think the entire district is interested.
The one thing a politician hates is negative publicity. They hate that with a passion.
Yeah. Well, you're 100% right about that.
And corporations should too, for that matter.
Yeah. Well, and I thought it was interesting. I think it's somewhere in your book that you said, if you don't do politics, politics will do you.
Absolutely right. I get people all the time that tell me, oh, I don't do politics. I say, well, that's your choice, of course. You could do that if you like, but I guarantee you, if you don't do politics, politics will do you.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, when was that I've never heard anybody say before. And so, and I think it's 100% right. We're in a participatory system here. And despite, I think, what a lot of people might believe, you can make a big impact
absolutely
on legislation, and you can make a big impact on government, and with a lot less effort, I think, than most people assume. But people assume that, well, I can't really make a difference. They can, and many of them are sitting around doing nothing, and then they wonder why aren't things going the way I thought it was supposed to go.
Exactly. Or they oftentimes think that if they just educate the legislator, if they make him understand, because obviously the facts are on their side, so if they make him understand by educating him, then he will support their position. Unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth. Education does not work in political action. Chances are the politician knows exactly what your situation is, and he feels free to ignore it unless you convince him that failure to support you will result in the loss of the things a politician values most: votes, money, power, and public accolades. And so what I do is basically behaviorism. I was a psych major in college. And so behaviorism, using operant condition, you punish certain behaviors and you reward other behaviors. And by doing that, you can shape the political environment.
Yeah. Well, and I remember going to a Leadership Institute training when I was in probably college.
Shout out to LI.
Yes,
We love you guys.
Yes. And the gentleman who was training was talking about how to impact legislators. And he said, legislators respond only to pain. And I thought, well, that's maybe a little dark, but over time, I've realized that's really true.
It is a little, but he's trying to get a college student's attention, right? He's got to go for you got to, be a little provocative.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's certainly this idea, I think, in the public that the only way to impact a member of Congress or a state legislature is to give them money. And I have found that's less true. It's a very limited way.
Unless you're willing to create a super PAC and, donate millions of dollars to the super PAC, that's probably not true. And what's worse, if you give money to a legislator in order to curry favor within their party, they will often regift it to another legislator who might not support your position. And that's why our political action committee does independent expenditures for or against candidates rather than throwing money at them. It's a more efficient means for affecting political change. So we do mailings, we do robocalls. Yes, I make those awful robocalls everybody hates. And if you could figure out another way I can reach a voter for 9 cents, let me know.
I know. We used to sell those. I totally get it. I totally get it.
And I still use robo-texts. And we've now added, obviously, we do radio advertising, Facebook advertising, and now we've also added geofencing that we use to elect Senator Ted Budd to the United States Senate. So our independent expenditures are pretty active, and that's probably the most efficient way to affect a politician.
Well, and it's great to have control, too, over what it's used for in the messaging.
But I want to get into the Rules for Anti-Radicals book. By the way, for those listening, available on Amazon today. It's been out for a couple of years, but definitely check it out. And I think there's a lot of stuff to learn if you're a business person, particularly like us, a business who is values-centric and talking about their values publicly. And, it's a playbook for defeating leftism, which for businesses often comes out in the form of, maybe a left-wing organization that has problems with your business. And so what would you, if you had to give a piece of advice, what's the top piece of advice you're going to give to conservative businesses as they work through this environment?
Well, the first thing I would say is have a plan. You see, in this politically charged environment we now have, it's very easy to get crosswise with some political organization. And so what you need to do is I'd basically tell business owners, because there's a section in the book called economic action. I divide action into political, economic, and legal. And so essentially, for political action, you need to have a plan in place on how to deal with a leftist organization if they target your company. And so I tell people they need to ask three basic questions. How likely is my business to draw the ire of political organizations? How do I want to deal with them? And by the way, that could mean you stand up to them, like Hobby Lobby has done, or Chick-fil-A, or perhaps you try to ignore them and hope they'll go away, which I found is not especially effective. Or you could capitulate to their demands, which of course encourages them to make more demands. The third question they need to ask is, how can I anticipate the problems and have a plan to respond accordingly? And basically a contingency plan, build an email network so you communicate directly with your people, and build a press list and be ready to do press work. And press work is very, very important. So that's the basic outline of what we want to do. Is we want to make sure that conservative businesses are not unduly targeted by leftist organizations. And that's why I'm here.
Yeah. We had this experience a couple of years ago. We had a individual come to us. They owned a restaurant, and a Republican politician visited their restaurant. They didn't host a fundraiser. They didn't do anything in theory to endorse the politician, but they let that politician come and eat there. And
shocking, I know.
And
heaven forbid.
Yeah. And I'm not sure if they posted pictures of it, but these left-wing organizations learned that this politician had eaten at their restaurant and then organized all sorts of trouble for them. They bombed their Yelp account with a bunch of fake reviews of people who said that, the restaurant was bad. And people had never been there, people from out of state, and, they were taken completely off guard by this, never imagined ever that their restaurant would get involved in any sort of political issue. And so I think that's what we're talking about here. And it's a real potential thing for a business, even if you're not trying to take some kind of political stance to get targeted.
Well, what I say is the self-proclaimed voice of tolerance is rarely actually tolerant. And so it's very easy to get crosswise with the leftist, because if you don't perfectly conform with their plan and their utopian vision, then guess what? You're on the receiving end of exactly what you just described.
Well, and the idea of having a plan is a good one. I mean, any business owner can appreciate you want to have a plan when you're having a product rollout. You have a plan when you're launching a new campaign. You've got a plan for all kinds of things. And you ought to have a plan for some of these things that could be unexpected. Even to Kurt's point, it could be something that doesn't even actually relate to how you're running your business. There could be all kinds of reasons. And so we've advised clients a number of times on, crisis communications and how to respond to those things. And I love what you said about the press work. Again, a lot of times, even if you don't want to be in the spotlight, talk to somebody in advance so that if anything like that should happen, there's less panic, less fear, you feel more prepared. And that's just wise business.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, I mean, one way they can be prepared, get more prepared, is to go to Amazon and get your book. But other than sort of,
I encourage that. Yes, absolutely.
I like what you said about having your own way to communicate with your customers via email.
Yes.
And being prepared to talk to the press. What other things, or maybe even you have some examples you want to talk about so that our listeners can kind of better anticipate, okay, here's some things I need to have prepared, or I need to maybe an example of somebody who's dealt with this and how they handle it.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I look at it, an activist model essentially breaks down into a flow chart. The first thing to use against an entity, the cheapest thing, is exactly what conservative businesses need to defend against. And that's economic action. Economic action is the cheapest thing for a political activist to use. Next is political action, electing or defeating candidates passing legislation, defeating legislation, whatever it happens to be. And the third is legal action. And you don't want to go to legal action if you can possibly avoid it. I can only imagine we have Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. They refused to make a cake based on their religious beliefs for a gay wedding, and consequently wound up in a huge national debacle resulting in legal action. Now, the good news is they won the case, but at what cost? How many hundreds of thousands of dollars did that cost them? And so you want to avoid getting to the point of legal action if at all possible. And you do that by controlling the political environment with respect to your business and essentially getting out your message to people and having your people reply. For example, what if Masterpiece Cake Shop had an email list and a list of people that they supported that were of their political philosophy to counterattack the left when they made their attacks on this organization, on this corporation? The result would have been, I think, far, far different.
Well, and I think the other thing you're saying when you're talking about political action is as businesses, we shouldn't ignore or pretend that we can be neutral when it comes to what's happening in our state legislatures and in Congress. And, a preemptive step also is to be paying attention to what is before your state legislature and making sure you're weighing in on it, because you can prevent some of these problems by making sure the right laws are in place.
Absolutely. You should probably subscribe. And I know it's a pain, but the legislative calendars for your state legislature will tell you what they've got on under consideration. And so I get of course, I doing political action, I have to get legislative calendars. I get committee calendars too that are more detailed. And we have the finger on the pulse of our state legislature. And I think that you're right. That's important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's not wait until, the environment has been created to be so negative. We don't have to be California, right?
I think a lot of corporations have gotten sideways, even unintentionally. They decide that DEI is what everybody wants: diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is anything but diverse and anything but equitable and anything but inclusive. So we have looked at I don't think Bud Light will ever recover from the Dylan Mulvaney debacle. It's widely conjectured that brand is just basically now tainted. Then we had Target with transgender children's clothing. Okay. And I mean, Target might be just selling normal stuff, and somebody decides in their organization to order transgender clothing for children. And suddenly they're on the receiving end now of a Florida lawsuit, as a matter of fact. Robbie Starbuck, this guy is a hero. He has gone after Tractor Supply, John Deere. These are organizations with essentially a core constituency of conservatives. They're Tractor Supply, they're going to be relatively conservative. That's like when we ran a boycott after we passed our concealed handgun bill. The governor decided he was going to try and post every business in the state against concealed carry. And so we created a don't buy list, basically an organized boycott with contact information for the people that are on the receiving end of this thing who have posted against concealed carry. And one of the people to post was Lowe's Home Improvement Centers. Now, why they would do that is beyond me, because their customers are my supporters. Okay. And so when we ran the boycott against Lowe's, I got to know the vice president of loss prevention, who told me that people were sending him entire receipts for entire home additions purchased at Home Depot because Lowe's was posted. And so
that had to hurt.
It may. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, those signs came down immediately,
right.
as did every other sign against concealed carry in the state. Well, I won't say every other one. Medical facilities were resistant to this because nobody will boycott their doctor. But other than that, we were able to get the vast majority of the signs down and break the trend toward postings to the point where you don't see posting in most businesses in the state of North Carolina. All right, this stuff works. And the thing to remember is that you might be running a corporation where you don't believe in DEI or you don't believe in something, and suddenly somebody does something, in your stores or whatever it happens to be that draws the ire of even conservative political activists. Now, the left used to be the best at this. They could do stuff with corporations. I mean, Saul Alinsky drew the rule book for it. Matter of fact, he started proxy wars. Okay. And he's probably responsible for BlackRock and Vanguard and some of these other organizations actually adopting, some of these strategies using proxy wars. And so you might not even intend to be crosswise with an organization. But now the conservatives have become every bit as good at this as the left is. And so it's very easy to get crosswise with a Robbie Starbuck or some other organization like that. It's a charged political environment. People have to be careful.
Hey, business owners, did you know there's 76.5 million faith-based and conservative consumers that are looking to support brands that align with their values?
That's a $5 trillion opportunity, and if you're not tapping into it, you're leaving money on the table. Our new book, Liberty Spenders, is your ultimate guide to reaching this influential audience using conviction-driven marketing.
That's right. We break down real-world strategies that successful brands are using right now to connect with this audience authentically, build trust, and drive long-term business growth.
So if you're truly serious about standing out in today's crowded market, grab your copy today on Amazon or visit libertyspenders.com. And don't miss out on this revolutionary strategy called conviction-driven marketing. Yeah, I mean, we deal with a lot of small businesses, but when we talk to bigger corporations, like a Bud Light, it's such a good example of now their audience probably skewed more Republican than on average, but you have to know, half of your customers at minimum, voted for Donald Trump or are more conservative, and it seems so, out of touch. But you fill up your marketing team with a bunch of young marketing types from San Francisco, and they just don't understand your customer anymore.
Bingo. Exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. And your point, I mean, they're still plummeting so bad. I read an article where they tried to pretend like it was all on purpose. I don't,
Yeah.
Budweiser tried to say, well, look, we were sort of already going to sunset that Bud Light brand anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah. Right.
But no, it's a, I've had another marketing expert on the show that says it may take them 10 years to rebuild that brand. And they're trying, they have a new spokesperson who's considered to be a little bit more of a Republican leaning.
Oh, absolutely. They've done conservative commercials and everything else. They've brought back the Clydesdales, a variety of things. But how much money is it costing them to repair this damage? How many millions of dollars did this cost them? It was utterly unnecessary. If anybody had even a modicum of good sense, they would not have run that issue campaign. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, I've made an offer publicly, and I'll make it again, for any large corporation. Bud Light lost $27 billion in 30 days from
billion. Okay.
From that and in valuation in just 30 days. And I'll tell you, a $10,000 1 hour phone call with us would have saved them $27 billion. So any big corporation, we're open for a quick $10,000 conversation to save them $27 billion. We haven't anybody taken us up yet, Kristen, but I'm hoping, we got to get the word out.
I think the lesson there, because it wasn't a big campaign that they ran, and people forget that. They assumed that it was some big launch. It wasn't at all. They were, you can trick yourself into thinking, okay, well, we have this very solid brand, this very solid consumer base. We want to expand. So this is one way to expand. But the problem they made is they doubled down when faced with resistance or questions or concern from their buyers, from their customers, doubled down on it in the messaging, which is just insulting. So going back to your point about having a plan and businesses being prepared and how do I want to handle this and let me think about this, is just smart so that you don't actually make the problem worse, because it could have been a little more innocent or unintended, whatever may happen to you. And you don't want to make it worse because you've not thought about how to respond.
Absolutely correct. Another one I loved was when Gillette decided to do shaving cream or razor commercials. I forget what it was that avoided toxic masculinity, and consequently, I'm sure they lost some consumer base on that too. So, the number of gaffes that corporations have made on this are sometimes stun me.
Yeah,
So-
It's an interesting thing to take up when you're trying to just help people shave their face.
Yeah. Well, this sort of, I thought it was interesting when Elon Musk called it the woke mind virus, because I look at it as there's this population that's turned the kind of woke thinking into a religion, right?
Mhm.
And
Absolutely.
it's this DEI stuff, the transgender rights stuff that's been elevated to the point of, we've got to make all this sort of virtue signaling in order to, to earn approval. And we obviously, the 2024 election, you saw a pretty big backlash against it.
Absolutely.
And,
huge.
you brought up Robbie Starbuck, and I think he's doing amazing work. And one of the reasons I like what he's doing is he's been able to get some of these corporations to bring rationality back to their hiring practices.
Exactly.
And we haven't had to do these big nationwide boycotts or anything. I don't know exactly how he's doing it. I don't know if he's, having dinner with their CEOs or what. Well, hopefully we'll get him on the show one day and he can give us his secret sauce. But
there you go.
I so appreciate it because, I think all Americans, long before it became some sort of woke mind virus activity, believed in the idea that we benefit from diversity in thought and diversity in people involved in all sorts of products. But the left had turned it into some sort of crazy, anti, like almost, they turned the whole situation on its head. It was like racism by some other name, right?
Well, what we're looking at, I mean, if you want to hear it, we're looking at about a 50-year effort. Actually, it's even longer than that. The interesting thing is we're now seeing all these riots at Columbia University. Well, Columbia University was ground zero for critical theory because the Frankfurt School and its Institute for Social Research, Marxists out of Germany, fled Germany. They fled the Nazis and brought critical theory to Columbia University in roughly 1937. And it's been metastasizing ever since, so then now into critical race theory. And so over the last several decades, we've seen, I call this neo-Marxism, and it's a cult. The problem conservatives have is, once again, they believe that because the facts are on our side, they can reason with the left, and the left will therefore assume their position. But the left doesn't care, okay? At this point, I see people, I don't think AOC or any of these other hard left Ayanna Pressley, I don't think they're capable of considering an alternative viewpoint. Well, they have been so thoroughly indoctrinated in neo-Marxism that their minds will not be changed. And if you try to educate them, they will probably use it against you. And so oftentimes, all you can do with the left is defeat them, and which Donald Trump clearly understands now and is doing a fine job of it.
The speed of action since he took office.
I call it the Blitzkrieg.
Yeah. It's been amazing and unpredictably swift, right? But you're right. Sometimes we can't win people over with words, and as a business, we've got to be prepared for tough fights. And one of the points you brought up earlier, which I'd like to revisit, is that sometimes a business or an organization thinks, well, I'll solve this problem by ignoring it, right? These people will go away eventually, or I won't say anything. Kristen mentioned it with Bud Light, that when this whole thing happened, it took him forever to make a public statement about it. And I think to some extent what people think is, well, I'd rather not say anything than say something that might create controversy or marginalize a group further. And I have found in my experience when we've advised businesses, all that does is create confusion. If something happens, if somebody's coming after you and sometimes it's okay to ignore it. I've had a couple of businesses where I've said, look, this is a tempest in a teapot. There's like 3 people who are making all this noise, and ignore them. But outside of those rare occasions, you got to take a position and stand firm on it,
Well, a lot of it involves assessing exactly how effective your opposition is. How many people do they control? Okay. Or how much influence do they actually wield? How much negative media can they make for you? And as you correctly mentioned, things like Yelp and social media are unfortunately very cheap ways to go after corporations. And so, again, have a plan and know what you're going to do when somebody, decides that they don't like this or that policy that you happen to be, or the customer you serve in your restaurant, as the case may be.
Brings to mind another example from our recent history. We had a large education nonprofit that was a client of ours, and they got the ire of some leftists over an individual they invited to speak to their organization, and they got all these Facebook posts. I'm never going to give to you ever again, over and over and over again. There goes my donations. Never going to donate. And I said, why don't we go look and see if any of these people ever donated before, right? Are we actually losing? And after thousands of comments with similar statements, they could find only one person who made one of those comments that actually was a donor to the organization.
Was real.
Yeah. The rest of them were just activists from other places trying to freak them out,
Oh, and I mean, this is a very coordinated effort you're seeing in the United States. These are the same, the individuals who are now promoting Hamas and running, violent demonstrations in the city of New York are the same people who were involved in the George Floyd riots. They're the same people involved in a variety of these. I tell people the problem is what you need to solve. The issue is how you frame the debate to solve the problem. And you should frame the issue to maximize your core constituency of support. Now, what we're seeing is these leftists just pick an issue. If they think they can sow discontent based on an issue, they grab it and run with it. And that's what they're doing on the Palestinian issue right now. And I use that word in quotes. And basically, they've made a mistake with this one, though, because unfortunately for them and fortunately for us, anti-Semitism does not sell. And so consequently, they've been on the wrong side of a lot of these issues, and they're getting a lot of backlash. That's the good news. But the bad news is if you find yourself in their crosshairs, life can be very, very unpleasant.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned, Chick-fil-A before, and they're a good example of somebody who's been attacked before and stuck to their guns, and their fans showed up in a big way and flooded them with business, and I think, if you take what Kristen was saying about Bud Light, for example, and you compare it to the Chick-fil-A situation, Chick-fil-A, it's years ago now when I remember this going down, but they were criticized for some of their charitable contributions, and the left tried to come after them, but they had such a good relationship with their core customer, and they stuck to their guns, and they didn't try to apologize for giving to Christian organizations. And so their customers shut up and supported them. And they understand, like, these are our people, and we're going to support them, in contrast to maybe what Bud Light was trying to do, which is, we're going to try to expand our base by, talking to a new, and just totally lost they didn't have a good understanding of their customer.
Well, and if I could interject here, I think there's a couple things about that I recall. It has been a number of years. And so this is based on a little bit of a fuzzy memory of mine. But I remember a number of conservatives not being happy with their response when you said stick to their guns. They thought they should have come out, guns stronger. I was thinking about this as we were just talking a moment ago, so it's perfect that this came up. It's not an accident. But for anybody listening, if you're a business owner and you're talking about all this and you got to be prepared to respond, and it could be a little scary. Like, I don't want to get involved in this, or, have to deal with, boycotts, boycotts, all these other things. And I think what's really a beautiful opportunity to mention is that if something like this does happen, and if you are targeted or there's some unwanted attention, what an amazing opportunity to, yes, you could say, quote, stick to your guns, or what I might say is live out your values and have a way to still be consistent with what you think is true, but to show your true character in that moment and to operate with integrity, with transparency, with compassion for people who disagree with you. And those are things that I really, think are tremendous opportunities. Not only can you feel good about how you've handled that, you're maybe not throwing fire, on the issue, but you can actually, have a greater impact in how people see you and your brand. And you may even win some people over. Maybe they can't be, quote, convinced, but they'll appreciate potentially how you choose to respond. So I think that's another great lesson as as anybody's thinking about this, is we're not saying you got to fight. I mean, I do think, to your point, Paul, when you said capitulation is an option, we don't recommend that. You want to be consistent unless you are in the wrong, or, unless you've made a mistake that you need to own up to.
Absolutely.
But I think, again, it's a great opportunity. We're talking about leading with conviction-driven marketing, living out your values, and that includes how you even choose to respond to things like this.
I think Hobby Lobby is a pretty good example of that. They stuck to their guns on their healthcare and their unwillingness to fund abortion, and they've done quite well over the years and survived nicely.
There's no secrets about our values and what we believe in, and this is the things we do, and exactly.
Yeah.
I'm a political bomb thrower, so I love it when a corporation basically thumbs its nose at some of these people. That's fun.
I totally understand that.
And you can get your side involved and actually wind up ahead of the situation. Lean into the controversy. And that's true with politicians too. That's what Trump does. He leans into the controversy. He does not hide from it. And unfortunately, our candidate for governor in North Carolina, Mark Robinson, did precisely the opposite. He hired some idiot campaign consultant who told him to keep his head down on his inflammatory remarks, and he lost by a lot. And so there are times where leaning into the issue is probably the best strategy, although that takes some guts to do it, because you got a fight on your hands if you choose to do that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And of course, as people have been political consultants a long time. Yes, more often than not, especially in a political campaign environment, that is your better bet, is to show strength. But again, not everybody's built for that, and you don't have to. You don't have to think that you have to do that every time.
Yeah.
The funny part was Mark Robinson was built for that. This is a guy who made some very definitive statements while speaking to churches and whatnot, and then just suddenly went silent on everything, and the left just ate him alive. It's a shame, actually. That's a shame.
Yeah, we've discovered this in various occasions. We had a governor's campaign years ago where, again, the left had gone after something that he did that they claimed was racist. It was not. It was a typical kind of exaggeration, and he was considering, quote, apologizing for it. And and what the campaign head did was he said, well, let's just ask the voters. And they ran a poll, and they found out that if he apologized for it, he lost more votes than if he simply didn't and continued to campaign. And so I think we've seen evidence of that. You can't, sometimes you lose more by just not standing up or staring straight in the camera and saying, this is the truth, or this is what we need to be paying attention to. There's always a balance in these occasions, because we have a couple of times told clients, like in the case of this example I gave earlier with the people who said they were donors, who weren't really, is our advice, although we made public statements about what they did, is we didn't respond to all those people because they weren't who they said they were. And so eventually they kind of fizzled out.
It was a waste of energy.
Yeah. So I do think that, but what you're talking about is so important, because sometimes you're deliberately engaging in politics, and sometimes politics engages with you. Right.
Yes.
Absolutely right. One thing I think that business owners and politicians, and matter of fact, everyone needs to understand, is that for the left, words don't have fixed definitions. They can call you a racist, they can call you a hater, they can call you a misogynist, whatever it happens to be. They have flexible definitions for their words, and what their words are designed to do is to bludgeon you into compliance. And the sooner that people understand that, the sooner they will know how to resist the efforts of the left, be it in business or politics or daily life. It could be your homeowners association. It could be a popular area right now, your school board. Okay, that's very popular. And so that's why I wrote the book, because people need to understand what they're dealing with. And there are some very basic tactics they can use to undermine and defeat the left in those environments, be it a school board, an HOA, a city council, a general assembly, federal legislation, or business. And all of these same principles apply.
Well, and absolutely. And you're 100% right. And being prepared, it is sad when those things are used. Name calling, hyperbole, these are not people interested in coming together to understand and, hold hands and work something out. So you're exactly right. And when you're faced with that situation, you do need to be prepared on how to respond and defend yourself.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that people also don't understand is that they look at these policies and they go, how could somebody be that stupid? How could they be stupid enough to run cashless bail or release criminals onto the street? What they need to understand, and this isn't necessarily true with the lower levels, but at its higher levels, it's deliberate. It's a deliberate attempt to disorganize society. Saul Alinsky, the author of Rules for Radicals, which has been the playbook for the left for the last 50, 60 years, actually. What he said was, in order to organize your society, you must first disorganize your society. And the leftists even have a name for that. They call it the Cloward-Piven strategy. That's what it is. And basically to overwhelm public services such that things actually melt down. And so it's a deliberate effort to destroy American society in order to create the great socialist utopia that they envision.
Well, I think it's a great way to start to pivot into our final section. So with everybody, we like to jump into our end of our interview with our lightning round. 3 quick questions, 90 seconds each, although there's no buzzer. So I don't know if it's a fake 90 seconds, but
90-ish. Got it.
Yeah, 90-ish. But we like to end people asking what legacy they'd like to leave behind, maybe from your work at Grassroots North Carolina or from your book. How would you answer that?
Well, basically, what I've been working for is to allow people to exercise basic civil liberties, all right, basic rights. In my case, I'm emphasizing rights under the Second Amendment, because when I started, there were no Supreme Court decisions affirming an individual right to keep and bear arms. Then we had the DC versus Heller decision, then we had the Douglas decision, and then of course we had the Bruen decision. And we actually had litigation as well that was supposed to be what Bruen eventually did, which was to strike down the laws that restrict carriage of firearms outside the home. Mm-hmm. And so what I've been working for the last 31 years is to restore to people civil liberties which have been usurped over decades, over the last century or more. And that sort of freedom is something that that I think is now finally starting to gain a foothold. And I believe we're probably starting to succeed.
Well, it's an exciting legacy. And to completely pivot, I like to give people 90 seconds to talk about any topic. It just has to be off topic. Maybe you're a big sports fan. You want to do a call out to your favorite team. Maybe you've read a good book lately. Maybe you have a hobby that's got you interested. What's something that's piqued your interest recently?
Hobbies. I don't know. I'm a big fan of defensive pistol use and defensive firearms use. And I take a bunch of courses. I've taken, 30 some odd courses from some very professional people. I want to give a shout out to Kevin Dialis of Blue Ridge Marksmanship. And this guy is a former Army Ranger, and he does some superb training, including things like vehicle gunfighting, where you're actually involved. And by the way, this is something that people who might wind up in one of these leftist riots might end up using, how to defend yourself from a motor vehicle. There's some pretty sophisticated stuff that he's done. I've taken a course called 3 Bad Days that I don't recommend to anybody unless they're ready, because it's an injured shooter course, and you're going to do most of it wearing a tourniquet, and then trying to defend yourself anyway. So
wow.
Whoa. Yeah. Maybe I'll start with some basics before I get there. But that's fascinating. What was his name again, and what was the name of his business?
Kevin Dialis, BlueRidgeMarksmanship.com.
Well, there you go.
That's the place. Yep.
A little call out. And then I wanted to do probably 90 seconds on your book. So somebody's listened. They're thinking, I like this guy. Give the quick 90 seconds on, what's a good person who should be reading your book?
Well, basically, I wrote rules for anti-radicals to allow not only dedicated political activists, but also people in daily life to resist the left in their attempts to control them. And that's what it's all about. It's all about control. And so the first part of the book, the first third of the book, is written for Joe Average American in order to allow him to resist these leftist attempts to control him. As I said, it could be your school board. Two guys that bought my book and created a political action committee, which is much simpler than most people think, and then defeated 2 sitting county commissioners. And so this stuff works. And these are the tools that you need. I wrote it to be an idiot's guide to political action because, with checklists, and you don't even have to read the whole book. You can kind of thumb through and find something that pertains to your situation and use it. I forgot to mention rulesforantiradicals.com. Rulesforantiradicals.com.
Yes.
My shameless self-promotion.
No, that's what we're here for. And we'll put that in our show notes. And I think it's so important because if you ask the average American, they're thinking there's absolutely no way they can make an impact. And so
You're absolutely right.
And there absolutely are ways. They're completely wrong. And so everybody rush to the store, but I'm now acting old here. Go to your phone, get on Amazon and buy the book. We've been so excited to have you, Paul, because I think this is a very valuable conversation. Like I said at the beginning, we do a lot of talk about how, if you're a business, how can you market to conservatives or Christians? But there's a very valuable side of this, which is how do you prepare if you might get called out, and how do you deal with it? So this has been a very important conversation.
Well, thank you for helping me get the word out.
Yeah. And so thank you for joining. To get in touch with Paul, you can hit him up at www.grnc.org and give that URL again for your book.
Rulesforantiradicals.com is exactly the title of the book. Rulesforantiradicals.com. No punctuation of any kind.
Well, there you have it. Thanks so much, Paul. Appreciate your time. And for those of you tuning in, we appreciate your attention as well. If you found value in this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything in the future. Thanks for tuning in. We invite you to join the Liberty Partnership community at libertyspenders.com. And again, you can get access to our book there at libertyspenders.com/free. Until next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Liberty Spenders Podcast. If you're a business owner, we hope today's conversation gave you valuable insights on how to grow your business.
If you enjoyed the show, do us a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. It really helps us reach more entrepreneurs and leaders like you who are ready to make an impact.
And write something flattering, because I read them all. Don't forget to grab your copy of Liberty Spenders too, available now on Amazon and at libertyspenders.com. It's packed with proven strategies to help you reach the 76.5 million consumers who are looking for brands that share their values.
We'll see you next time as we continue exploring how to grow your business with purpose and conviction.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode and the one after that.